All right. Good afternoon, everybody. All right, and welcome to folks on Zoom. We use Zoom quite extensively here, so we probably have quite a few folks over there. All right, so my name is Joyce Chu. I have the great pleasure of welcoming and introducing Dr. Sofia Pertuz. So Sofia joined the Jed Foundation in November of 2019 with over 20 years of experience in strategic planning, assessment, inclusive excellence in critical incident management in higher education. She most recently served as Associate Vice President and Dean of Students at Hofstra University and Assistant Dean and Director for Multicultural Affairs at Fordham University. Sofia teaches as an adjunct in a higher education leadership and policy program at Hofstra and has been an invited speaker on topics in leadership, diversity, social justice, and LGBTQ advocacy at various institutions and conferences, including delivering keynotes and webinars in Spanish. Sofia dedicates volunteer time sharing knowledge and skills through mentorship and organizational activities, aiming to create inclusive and caring communities. She currently serves as the co-chair of the Board of Directors of Erase Racism, ERASE. Sofia completed a BA degree in organizational communication from SUNY New Paltz and earned her MS and Ph.D. in higher education leadership management and policy, both from Seton Hall University. I can say with a lot of just confidence that in meeting with Sofia about a month ago or so, we have so many overlapping interests, and she has such a deep commitment to some of the same missions and related to social justice and diversity that we do. So we jumped at the chance to invite her here to meet with us. So thank you, Sofia.
Thank you. Hold the applause for the end where you could decide if you want to. I just want to say thank you so much to Joyce and Maureen and others I've talked to before I came here. How it came about, we were having a conversation about possibly collaborating at some point with regard to mental health of students and the connection to suicidality and our new equity and mental health framework that we are incorporating into our JED comprehensive program we already had. And while we were talking, I said, you know, I'd love to meet you in person. You seem so amazing and your program seems so progressive. I need to learn more. I happen to be in California coming to San Jose City College. If we can make it work, I will come a day early. And somehow we made it work. So I can't believe that it did, but it was meant to be. So I appreciate it. I know you have more to offer than I do. And as a speaker, you're not supposed to say that. But I do hope to share a little bit about our journey at JED. I just got there in November. And after 24 years in higher education in different positions, living on, living off, working with students 24/7 sometimes through many different crises and, you know, personal and institution-wide. I've worked through many different things. So, for example, the Seton Hall fire, that kind of thing. We had students we lost for different reasons, whether it's overdose, suicide, name it. And as personal tragedy for students, they didn't get picked for the club they wanted or the sorority or fraternity, you know? So we can think of that from so many different perspectives. But my mission has always been to make sure that all students can enjoy and really love their campuses the way that I did my undergrad. So I'll tell you a little bit first about me so that you're wondering, you know, who are you? What are you doing here? And what brought me to the work at JED and leaving the stability and wonderfulness of being at one institution to working with many different institutions at a not-for-profit organization. And it was definitely the equity and mental health framework that did it for me, and you'll see why when I talk about it. This is about me. I spared you the kindergarten picture, the kindergarten graduation, although I found it the other day. I said I should add it, and I didn't have time. So this is 8th grade, you know, high school, undergrad, and my PhD finally after working on it for so long. Along my journey, I've worked at, like I said, many different institutions, and I have to say that as a Latina who grew up in the Bronx, born in Dominican Republic, brought here when I was almost 1, and I realized when you put things in context, it's very interesting. The day I arrived or was brought here, it was August 4, 1974. And I realized I was listening to a book, and it was around the time that President Nixon was about to step down and resign. So I can't imagine what that was like for my mother. Not speaking a word of English, trying to understand a new country, bringing two babies, me and my older sister, and trying to navigate a country that didn't have a president or was trying to figure that out. So I can't even, imagine what our students are going through stress-wise. And so I can't imagine that time. But here I am, and I grew up in the Bronx near Yankee Stadium, so I have to be a Yankee fan. Anybody here from the East Coast and like the Yankees? Okay. Good. We're good. So growing up in the Bronx, of course, it was one of the early times that I realized that I was different from others. Was I was Dominican, growing up in this housing project where it was mostly Black and Puerto Rican. So being Dominican was different, and some people might say, wow, how's that? Isn't Latino all the same? And it's actually not. And I learned that along the way and got exposed to different cultures when I went to high school. It was all girls Catholic high school in Manhattan, but it was near the UN. So many of my classmates were from countries that don't even exist now, from Yugoslavia, from China, it was just so cool because people spoke many languages, not just one or two. I thought I was special because I spoke two, knowing Spanish and English. So that was pretty cool. And that was my first exposure as to you don't know everything. There are different people around you, and you can learn from everyone around you in some way. So the final slide of personal things that I'll share with you is what brings me to this work. I've always been someone who wants equality for all and everyone to be able to take full advantage of opportunities. And I've been very lucky to have mentors and people in my life who just sought me out and said, there's something special. You should do this. Or I found this opportunity for you to be part of that you might not know about. It's those tapping someone on the shoulder. And some of you in this room were those people that someone sought you out and said, there is something about you. You really need to take advantage of this opportunity over here that you might not have known about. So honestly, when it comes to mental health, that idea of mattering to someone, mattering to many, mattering at all is probably the bottom line and what brings me to this work. So I am a mother of 2 children, and I have a lot of responsibility in that, and not just for them, but for all students. But now I've got more skin in this game, right? One of my offspring, I say offspring for very specific reasons, on my left, your right, is my daughter, Ariana, who, this is her style. This is who she is. And she is now a sophomore in high school, and she recently took the PSAT. She loves tests, by the way. She's one of those kids that likes multiple choice tests. I know that's rare. It's like the anti-anxiety. And I was like that, so it's kind of funny. My son will be different though. But she's in high school, and she's now being recruited by all these colleges, and we're looking at the brochures, and I want to make sure she's going to go somewhere that affirms her as a human and doesn't give her looks when she dresses the way she wants to be and who she wants to be. And we've been in settings where we went to a mother-daughter dance once, and we had to leave after like half an hour because the way she was dressed was different than everybody else. She wore a bow tie. She was really, I thought she was so cute. And other people didn't think she was cute. So this is what brings me to my work, if you were wondering. All that, to put it in context. So the Jed Campus program, I'm going to give you an overview of what our comprehensive program that's already has been in existence. Jed was founded in 2000. The Satow family lost their son Jed to suicide, December of 1998. And of course, that was a major impact for them and their family. And they said, okay, we need to figure out what happened. And they went back to the university where their son was attending, and they figured out that the leadership there just didn't have answers for them, at least the answers they wanted about what safety nets were in place that could have caught it somewhere. You're not always going to catch these things. There's always going to be something missing or something you didn't see, and you can't blame administrators and fellow students. However, they did find that there just wasn't an organization that existed that was focusing on campus-wide comprehensive approach. Not that different than when BIT teams came out. When the Virginia Tech thing happened, many campuses said, oh, if we were all communicating and connecting the dots about this one student, we would have all figured out that there was a meltdown over here one day. There was an issue over here one day, classroom issues. So if we had all been meeting in a behavior intervention team, maybe we would have connected those dots. So this is, in a way, similar, but it was back in 2000 that they figured out. Let's create a system that is research-based, that is a comprehensive approach, and this has evolved over time. So I won't read every single slide, and I can also send these to you so that you can understand the program. There's a lot of wording on some of these slides, but it's a 4-year, when a campus becomes a Jed campus, that means that they are engaging with the Jed Foundation for 4 years. They start out with assessments that I'll tell you about. They are gathering information on their campuses about, do you have a behavior intervention team? What is your counseling staff ratio? The recommended ratio is about 1,000 to 1,500 per student. Does it fit that somehow? And if it doesn't, what do you need to do? Do your staff communicate about students in distress? Do you have a good crisis management system? How do you communicate about issues on campus? So all these assessment tools are collected right at the beginning. Students take a HMS study, Healthy Mind Survey from the University of Michigan that was developed. And many campuses already do that study. It's not that different than ACHA-NACHA, you know, those assessments. The American College Health Association does a assessment of mental health, students' adjustment, their connection to campus, their engagement. So the Healthy Mind Survey focuses a lot more on their mindset. So what are they thinking about? Their emotional health on campus and connections on campus. And they recently added a diversity and inclusion module that I'll tell you more about, because we are now adding it to the assessment that we have our campuses do as part of our equity and mental health, and looking at disparities within the mental health resources on campus. Some of this has to do with support of senior leadership. We realize that if the campus leadership is not involved with decision making, guess what happens? Resources aren't placed where we need them and where students need them. So we need campuses to have their senior leadership involved. So part of the commitment for a campus is to say, okay, who from your leadership, top leadership that are decision makers, are part of your comprehensive team on your campus? And are they coming from different places? Residence life, your student activities, and your counseling center. So it doesn't fall only on your counseling center. It has to be everyone who has some kind of touch with students. And that includes academic affairs. Sometimes we forget that faculty see things that sometimes our very own peers won't see, or even families won't see, because they see it in their writing. They see it in the way that they might be different from one day to the next when they come to class. So there has to be diverse voices that are involved in this process. So the evaluation model starts with a framework of 7 domains. And I'll tell you what those are. Developing life skills, and these are not in any order, because some campuses are really great with one domain, but they might be lacking in another, so we just collect information on all of it. We believe that comprehensive approach has to do with each of these areas, and over time, these have been developed, and more information and questions. When you see the questionnaire, it's very detailed when we ask campuses what they do and what they don't do for students in these areas. Promoting social connectedness, identifying students at risk, increasing help-seeking behavior, providing mental health and substance abuse services, whether that's through programming or direct services through counseling, pretty relevant to you. Following crisis management procedures, sharing that information on campus, like I said before, restricting access to potentially lethal means. So that could mean, what are your gun policies on campus? What are your weapons policies? And what are your policies for discarding medicine and drugs? We don't think of that sometimes, but sometimes if someone starts with one medication and they're no longer taking it, we want to encourage students, go take it to the pharmacy or create a way on your campus to discard them so that someone else doesn't have access. And talk about the dangers of sharing medications, because sometimes it's not just drug abuse or it's also misuse and sharing in ways that are very unhealthy and could be lethal in ways that they might not realize. And then, of course, developing life skills. And this is one, the developing life skills is one we're looking at for our high school. Building resilience, we have a Set to Go program. And I have a flyer for Seize the Awkward, different programs that we have for young people to get them thinking about, you can all help each other out. You can all look out for each other and take those awkward moments to ask, are you okay? How's it going, really? I actually want an answer. And catch those moments when you see someone acting a little bit out of sorts, because every one of us, again, that idea of the comprehensive approach. So these are a little more detailed so you can see it. The other one is it was really small. But fostering connectedness, creating opportunities for systems to notice someone in distress. And one thing I want to say before I talk about the equity and mental health framework is that we realize that this looks different for everyone. The idea, for example, of help-seeking behavior. If some students are from a culture that is strongly discouraging counseling, you don't talk out of turn, you don't share your business, you don't tell someone outside your family what's happening for you. Some families, that's the way they grow up. So when you talk about help-seeking behavior, you're not only asking a student, get help if you need it, identify when you need help, you're also telling them, go against what your family has been telling you your whole life. And that's where the equity and mental health comes in, right? The idea of social connectedness. Some students feel completely isolated because they're the only one on their campus or one of very few. And I hear those stories over and over. I'm the only one, I'm the only one. We did focus groups, and that's I would say that's one of the few things that we hear from most campuses that we've talked to, that students of color, if it's a predominantly or historically white institution, they just feel really isolated and feel invisible or feel just unseen and in the margins for sure. So we know that there has to be something added to this comprehensive approach that addresses those marginalities. And when I talk about the equity and mental health framework, we geared it towards students of color. It was a partnership with the Jed Foundation. However, when you really look at it, you're looking at all marginalized populations. And we've been talking with the Tyler Clementi Foundation at Rutgers to try to figure out, okay, how do we come up with something similar and very specific things? There are many organizations already that exist for LGBTQ plus students. But how do we bring that together and make sure that things in the Campus Pride Index, questions are included in our assessments, that we're asking very specific questions about how the counselors engage, how they're trained to hear some things, and how they are considering gender and non-binary students and everything in between when they're providing services, doing marketing, and asking students very pointed questions. So these are some of the assessments. There are 122 questions on the assessment we send to institutions. And we say to them, it can't just be one person answering the question, because there are many questions on it that asks about resources that you might not have access to, about public safety. If you don't work in public safety, you might not have the specifics about how they do what they do. If you're not in the Dean of Students office, you might not know how often their BIT team meets, who's on it. So that's what I mean. It has to be a comprehensive approach with everyone answering the survey. We do a pre and post version of the Healthy Mind Study, and on the next slide I have more information about the HMS. These are the different domains or areas that are on this test about mental health, depression, anxiety, self-injury, suicidality. They're very specific questions for self-reporting, lifestyle and health behaviors, attitudes and awareness, service utilization. So there's a difference between, and this is where the data can come together. We ask the counseling centers, what percentage of your students do you think use your services? How many days do students wait for an appointment? Is there a waiting list? How many counselors do you have? How many students come in? So we ask very specific questions about actual utilization, but then the other side of it is the students who say they use it or not. How likely are you to go? How often have you gone? How are you aware of your peers going to counseling and using those services? So we look at both data, and if it doesn't match, that's a point of recommendation to get a sense of what's happening there. So that gives us a good sense, some baseline information that's done at the beginning of the process when a school engages, and then again 4 years later. And that's why it's a 4-year process, because we want to know what happens over time and what is there a change over time. So I'm going to go quickly through this again, because I really want to talk more about the equity and mental health framework. And some of you have said you have a meeting to run to. So hopefully you can watch this later and get more information. Because to me, the equity and mental health framework is the part that you really want to know more about. And I would love to hear your questions and your comments when I do that part. So I think all along I've been talking about this, all the different things we do along the way for, assessment, implementation. So what are the things you're going to change on your campus to make sure that students are accessing counseling and other services on campus in the way that helps them thrive and helps them feel like they're connected to their campuses. Then we get to a learning community participation where campuses can get together with other schools on an online forum that we have for them. So we create resources and are constantly posting articles. Many of you have written really great work that's going to become part of what we call our playbook and resources, because there's already information out there. We don't have to invent it. We have many scholars like you who are already doing this work and are already gathering information to help frame some of the way that services can best work for students from many different backgrounds. Evaluation and sustainability. So by the time a campus is done with their 4-year process with the Jed Foundation, we're hoping that they've made some significant changes on their campuses, that they've evaluated their processes, that they've looked at their numbers and what kinds of resources they're putting towards the well-being and mental health well-being of all students. So hopefully, after the 4 years, they continue to stay on as alumni schools and still seek out resources, because we're never done. There's always something changes. There's more, things have changed. Anybody who's been in higher education, anybody here been in higher education more than 20 years? Okay, have things changed? How do you think, and I'll ask more questions, to you at the end, but I've noticed changes, and not just with the way students are. And there was an article in the Chronicle a couple of weeks ago that says faculty need to teach the students they have, not the students they want. There's always this nostalgia for, back in my day, we didn't have phones, we didn't have people, we didn't have this, so we were able to really engage as students. And where I'm like, yeah, but we were still anxious, we were still worried about our grades, we were still there's some similarities. Just what changes is the technology and the way campuses evolve and change their services and their amenities, I would call it. Amenity was not a word when I went to college. Like, amenity. We didn't even have cable in my room at all. So we think of it as a theory of change. We want there to be a systemic process for how we make change. And for some reason, this thing's not coming up. Oh, it is coming up. Okay. So I'll put them all up so you can see them at once. But as schools, our thought is, as schools implement these steps, hopefully they will develop better services for students on campus and get better results with students feeling more connected. And the main focus here, aside from students' well-being, obviously, is that students graduate, that they thrive if they choose to. We're actually looking at some of our language because we've added more technical schools, we've added more community colleges, and for some students, graduation is not the goal. Just attending and getting through semester by semester is the goal. So we're trying to figure out our language with degree completion instead, or using certificate completion, or just completing your goal, whatever that is. Because it started out with traditional 4-year private colleges, and we always think of, and I teach the American college student right now at Hofstra, and my first class I had a whole discussion with them about, let's describe the typical college student. And we went down the list. Entitled, hardworking, words that opposite each other, but we went through the whole exercise, and what we found was there is no such thing. There is no one way to deal with every single person. Yes, research tells us here's some common things that we found just to give us a baseline, but at the end of the day, there is no typical anything, even institutions. You can't even compare one 20,000 student institution to another one that's 1,500. You just can't. Some similar things you can compare, but you have to take each campus individually, and that's what we're realizing through this theory of change, that you really do have to get that. That's when the comprehensive approach and everyone involved, it becomes even more important, because things that are unique to that institution would be very unique. So don't worry, I'm not going to make you read this, but this gives you an idea of when we do engage with campuses, we give them a list of all the domains, and we try to figure out where they are needing additional support. And that's where we ask them to look at their strategic plan and say, okay, here are some suggestions. So on Thursday, I have a visit with one campus, and I noticed that their counseling center is 3 or 4 clicks in, let's say. And our recommendation is you should be able to find right on your front page, or at least one more click, to get to any mental health or other crisis response kind of website. That should be really quick to find, easy to find on your website. So that's one small suggestion. But the thing is, that's when you have to get your communications folks involved, your web folks involved, because they might say, well, our page is actually designed for recruiting. However, students look to the webpage still and they search for what they need. So there's like that give and take on each campus of who's the website for, because you can only have one, really. I mean, and you have to, and that's really valuable real estate. Trust me, I've learned this. Going back and forth, like, can you please put this on the front page? It would mean so much to these students. Well, this week other things are cute, and no, we can't do it. So it's tough. So how do we measure impact? Again, I told you a little bit about all the different assessments. We go through them all, and we have a campus advisor who's the liaison to the institution, and they will follow up with them, ask them, how's it going with this? Do you need any help? Are there any resources I can offer you, any websites, any technical assistance that you might need to actually do something you're wanting to do? And that's what we're going to do with the equity and mental health framework. So I'm jumping to that. Now, any questions about the Jed campus program before I move on to the equity and mental health? That's the comprehensive approach. Okay. So there was a partnership between the Steve Fund. The Steve Fund was founded in 2014. Very similar story to Jed. A family lost their son in 2014 to suicide. And the mom, her name's Stephanie, really nice. It ended up, she went to the high school of my daughter. Strange. I finally got to meet her, and it was just one of those coincidences. It's a small world. But she lost her son, and she was trying to figure out what resources are there for students of color. He was African American. And there was no organization that existed that was similar to Jed that was focused on the emotional well-being and suicide prevention for young people of color. So that's what she did with the Steve Fund. And that's why the Steve Fund exists. So both organizations got together a few years ago and started a research study about how students of color experience the same things of other students. And they found many interesting findings, but the bottom line was, I don't want to go to a campus that treats me like it's a cookie cutter situation. I need different resources. There's something that is unique about my experience that makes it important and critical that an institution pay attention to what's happening that might be different and what kind of resources they need to offer. So that idea of one size fits all, again, the typical student, if we have that in our mind, if we close our eyes when we think of any institution, then that's part of what's wrong, that idea. So we're committed to helping universities think about this more, and this is when I talk a little bit about what brought me to this work, even more specific. As the Dean of Students at my previous institution, and having worked in multicultural affairs full time, I had been in many conversations about, so what do we need to do differently? How do we respond to students who are activists, who are upset about something on the campus that is really bothering them? You know, in Hofstra's case, it was the Thomas Jefferson statue that was right in front of the Student Center. Students said, I have to walk by it every day and be reminded about slavery and my heritage and my life with that. Can we just move it? We're not saying get rid of it. And we know many campuses, leadership have stepped down over this. Silent Sam at UNC Chapel Hill. I can name so many leaders who are trying to just do the right thing and trying to make decisions, but are caught up with tradition and the idea of legacy and the idea of how history needs to stay visible, but how do you reconcile that with how students are feeling today, right now, and what that means for them? So what brought me to this was I saw the equity and mental health framework, and I said, okay, finally, it's a group of 10 recommendations that are obvious when I go through them, if you haven't seen them yet. They're obvious if you really want to create a campus environment that is safe and that feels like you are welcoming to all students and not just white students. Sometimes people will say, well, if you focus on this group, the other group doesn't get the attention. But I want to say, if you focus, you know, there's that expression, if you take care of the least of my people, you'll take care of all, because then everyone will thrive and everyone can connect with each other. And I truly believe that. So I don't think I need to give you too much information. You seem like a place that has done a lot of work around this, but the idea of identity and demographics, there are so many ways that students identify. And now some students are not identifying. And some researchers are getting upset. What do you mean you can't check something off? But as generations happen over time, there are some people who will not identify with the thing that you think they should. So it's that idea of how I identify versus how you think I identify. So it's very interesting. And then there's always has anyone seen this? The iceberg theory of culture, where there's what you see that's very visible, and then there are the things that are underneath that make up who you are and what culture you're from. And then, of course, the idea of intersectionality. No one's just one thing. Students come from many different places, whether it's a geographical difference. I was just talking to someone about the idea of the East Coast versus West Coast. I feel like an early bird here. I've been up since 5. Like, woo! At home, I don't do this. But the thing is, it's 8 o'clock, really. So if I'm up at past 8, then I've overslept. So that's definitely a culture difference, but not exactly culture the way you might think about it. And then I talked a little bit about this, the national landscape in higher ed and how it affects leaders and why it's so important for us to be focused on the mental health well-being, because students are suffering. And I'll tell you one quick story. One of our very active activists at Hofstra, very strong person, really scaring the president's office a lot. I mean, he would find her op-ed to read him because he was like terrified of her. And I'm like, she's 19. You know, she's nothing to be afraid of, but there's Twitter. So you can be very afraid of what gets out there and how quickly information about your school can taint the reputation and the impression that people have, no matter what experience you have at that place. Seton Hall had a lot of press lately, and I didn't experience a campus like that, where students are stating outright, this place is racist. I feel marginalized here. And I was at Seton Hall, lived on campus, and was there for many years, and I never experienced that really. So that doesn't mean that it's any less valid for the students that are there right now. So things change and times change. So that student was in my office bawling before I left, because she's trying to say, what else do I have to do for them to hear me? What else do I have to do for the leadership to understand what I'm going through? And she's just crying. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, am I referring her to counseling? What am I doing? And honestly, part of what I need to do is say to the president, just listen. Just listen and hear them out. They're trying to tell you something that's bothering them, and we're making decisions without bringing them in the conversation. So nothing to be afraid of, but treat people like humans. So this is one example for me that hit close to home. This was and close to home for you, literally. The Claremont Dean of Students a few years ago wrote a letter to a student, wrote and said, as a Latina student, I need to tell you how I experienced this campus that's different than everyone else. I'm really suffering. I'm having a hard time, and wrote a whole blog entry about it. Sent it to the dean, and the dean's answer was, if you just read it quickly, it's very supportive. We at the Dean of Students office, you know, we care about you. We want you to come in and talk with us. And it's not to the end when she gets to the part of, we are working on how we can better serve students, especially those that don't fit our CMC mode. And some people might say, well, I don't see how that's an issue. But not only have you not validated the student, you did, but then you said, you still are not part of the mode. And this is the kind of things that students experience. And one more example is this one from Suffolk University, where a student had a professor write on her paper for the word hence, this is not your word. So I'm thinking to myself, how many other people have used this word? It doesn't belong to anybody, really. And so are we going to take other words and decide whose word they are? And just as an aside, I actually used this at the end of my dissertation. This is how I ended. Hence. So it was one of those moments of like, these are the reminders that we have on our campuses where we haven't done training, we haven't had conversations about how these kinds of moments that seem at quick glance, just criticism, feedback, just information, but they highly impact the way that the students feel on campus and how they continue through their academic journey. Because that's just not their only moment. They have the rest of their time. So these are the 10 recommendations. I break them down 5 and 5, but I'm going to go through them in more detail, and I'm being mindful of time because I also want to leave room for questions, and I want to hear from you what some of your thoughts are. And if something is missing from these, I'd love to hear that. So these are the 10 recommendations that are part of the Equity and Mental Health Framework. And I can send it to you, the whole thing, so you can see how the research informed how these recommendations came up. Identify and promote the mental health and well-being of students of color as a campus-wide priority. Engage students to provide guidance and feedback on matters of student mental health and emotional well-being, so asking students. Actively recruit, train, and retain a diverse and culturally competent faculty and professional staff. Create opportunities to engage around national and international issues and events. Create dedicated roles to support well-being and success of students of color. 6 through 10, support and promote accessible, safe communication with campus administration and an effective response system. Offer a range of supportive programs and services in varied formats. Help students learn about programs and services by advertising and promoting through multiple channels. Identify and utilize culturally relevant and promising programs and practices and collect data on effectiveness. Participate in resource and information sharing within and between schools. So I'll actually go through each one and give you some examples, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on these as I go along. So the idea of making it a campus-wide priority. Sometimes campuses will have a diversity statement, and they will include it in the mission, but then don't take the actions it takes to make sure that the recruiting message coming in matches the actual experience when students are there. And again, there was something in the Chronicle a couple of weeks ago about how admissions offices were using Photoshop to make their pictures for recruiting more. And if there's any of the information I'm telling you, like what article was that, I'm happy to send you the links because I saved them. I saved them all because it was to me like, really? I mean, I hear students say that, oh, I think everyone's Photoshopped in there. And I say, no, these are my colleagues. They would never do that, explaining it away. Yet there was a moment where a reporter found that schools were doing that. And they were like, this student doesn't even go here. Why would you have students on your marketing materials that don't go there? You have students that you can take pictures of. But if you're trying to look more diverse on your marketing materials than how your campus feels for those students, something's not right. The second one is engaging students and asking students. So what would you like to see? And sometimes students get frustrated because they say, well, I shouldn't have to do all the work. I shouldn't have to be the one that's going around educating and bringing these issues up. So we need to think of ways that we can engage students and ask them what they need without it putting, okay, good, now that I know what you need, why don't you put that together? Oh, you need peer support? Good, do it. Let's figure this out. Let's figure out ways to support the students and not only get information from them, but also take the actions and help students. I'm not saying don't get students involved in the process, because I think that's very empowering when students get brought in to be part of the solution. But it shouldn't only be on students, and some campuses have really not focused on helping. Actively train, retain, and recruit a diverse and culturally competent staff. So here's one thing I want to say about this. There are many staff members of color on some campuses who are the go-to for all students of color, and that's exhausting. So I want to make a case. I've had many mentors who were white men who took me under their wing and just were culturally sensitive enough, culturally humble enough to work with me, and really didn't need to know anything about me. Just let me know what their expectations were of me and said, here's what you think, here's what we need to do. Oh, your writing isn't strong? Okay, there's a writing center. You need to learn how to do this thing? Okay, you know you can hire someone to edit that thing before you turn it in. So along the way, there are ways that you can have all staff be able to work with all students. Can you imagine what it would be like if students, if as the dean of students, I said, oh, there's a white student in my office, let me call my colleague, figure out how to work through this. And I actually have colleagues who have called me and said, you know, I had this student of color come and I didn't know how to help her, so I just sent her over to you. Imagine if people of color did that, you know, it would be so strange. So why don't we just make sure that everyone has what they need, the tools they need, the cultural humility, sharing, and being able to just ask open-ended questions. Try not to stereotype. And you know, there's plenty of ways to do this, but this is one of them that I think is important to take the pressure off. Yes, diversify faculty and staff, absolutely. And there are ways to do that too. There are many strategies for diversifying your staff and faculty. But I also think you train, that's just as important, making sure that everyone could be a support to everyone on campus. Creating opportunities to engage. Sometimes a student will be sitting in your class who just saw something on the news that deeply affected them, whether it's an issue of police brutality, something about the wall, something, anything that's coming up in current events that might be impacting one student, and they'll sit in class and say, no one else cares about this. No one seems to even know that it happened. Why am I the only one that knows this? So trying to figure out ways that when students are feeling deeply about something, that there are ways that they can engage, whether it's through an office that's dedicated to creating dialogue on campus or creating ongoing conversations that are responsive to things. When I was at Fordham in the Multicultural Affairs office, I said to students, if you see something on the news or something has affected you, just send me a text or an email and say, can we have a dialogue? So we would have pop-up dialogues. We call them deeper dialogues, where from one day to the next, we would just put it together. And if somebody needed a forum or a space to unpack something, that's what we did. When Ferguson verdict came in the morning, I sent out a tweet. So I had students coming to my office. Same thing. I kind of set that tone with students. Like, if there's anything you want to do, I do have a fund at the Dean of Students to do programming anytime. That morning I got in, I had students waiting for me in my office. What are we going to do about this? What are we going to do? What are we going to talk about this? I'm like, today at 5. Right in the hallway, we had a big hallway there. And I'm thinking, okay, I have some funding. I can order pizza and other food. And I sent out a tweet in the morning. It's still out there if you want to find that tweet. But I sent out a tweet in the morning. We had 80 people show up. 5 o'clock that day, that evening. I think it was for the pizza maybe, but I don't think so. It was a conversation that lasted 3 hours. Students just needed a space to unpack some of what they were feeling already through a season of many different incidents that were coming up in the news. Support dedicated roles for student of color well-being. While I do say everyone needs to be ready to help every single student, I also think having an office of multicultural affairs or something like that is helpful, because then you have someone dedicated that does research, that has information and can gather, just like any other specialty, right? You do need an office that provides access. When someone has a learning disability or has another access need, you have someone who knows the trends, knows best practices, knows how to communicate that, knows how to train on those topics, right? But that doesn't mean everyone doesn't need to have some awareness and sensitivity around that topic. Does that make sense? When you kind of make the parallel there? So that's the point here, that you have people on your campus who are thinking strategy also. So there's Office of Multicultural Affairs type offices that are dedicated to helping students and creating spaces for students. But then you also have people like a chief diversity officer, a vice provost for diversity and inclusion, to look at curriculum and the classes and the way that things are offered. Do they give a balanced view? Do you have enough perspectives? Do you have enough different kinds of faculty teaching different kinds of classes? Do they make sense to students? So there's different ways to go about it, but those dedicated roles are those knowledgeable, skill-based roles. But I still make a case for everybody needs to be involved. So I'll always come back to that. Supporting efficient and effective communication across all facets of campus administration. There has to be a way that students can report, whether it's bias incidents that for some people might seem minor. One issue that I found that was very interesting was at one place I worked, when students would go to the public safety office to report a bias incident, the person would say, and they were well-meaning because it didn't fit, the person was a previous police officer, so for them, if they're thinking the definition of a hate crime is this, it is very specific. So they're thinking, I don't even know if I need to write that down because you didn't know who it was or you don't want to tell me. There's nothing we're going to do with that information. And basically that student walks out and says, they didn't even hear me. They didn't validate what just happened to me or how I felt. So there has to be ways to submit that somewhere, whether it's an online form or a dedicated office that receives that information and does something with it. Sometimes as counselors, many of you are counselors, telling someone is enough and being validated is enough, right? So if you have a public safety office or another office that is dedicated to hear it and say, oh, I'm really sorry that happened. Why don't you write down what happened so we can figure this out? Because the other thing you can do is find patterns. If something seems to be happening in a classroom over and over, and we found this, that there were some faculty who were saying things in the classroom that were very offensive. And if you have a few students who report something that happens because they don't feel comfortable telling the faculty themselves, because that's what I always tell students, do you feel comfortable going back to them? This is the resilience, working out problems. You know, why don't we role play how you're going to talk to the faculty about that? And I would do that. But there are moments when they're worried about their grades. They're worried about retaliation, or they know that it's a pattern and many students are feeling the same and they don't feel like they want to be the one that brings it up. So making sure that you have effective communication about issues like this coming up in the classroom really does help get something done, whether it's a strategy for training or another kind of intervention that needs to happen. Sometimes it's a mediation that could happen. Or sometimes it's the faculty member doesn't realize what they're saying is offensive. I've honestly had many moments where, as dean of students, a student will tell me something that happened in class, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I know that faculty member, I'm pretty sure they didn't mean it that way, but I don't want to invalidate this student telling me. So I'm going to hear it out. Tell me more. Is it okay with you if I reach out to let the person know that this came my way? I don't have to give your name. And 9 times out of 10, the person would say something like, I did not realize what I did. I had no idea that that was an issue. Or singling out a student because of their background was a problem. I actually had a whole conversation with a tenured faculty member who had been where I was working for 20 years, who said, but I thought they felt special when I singled them out or asked them to contribute in a certain way. So we brainstormed ways that if you want that contribution in your class, if that's the only one, so I'm Latina, so I can, say this, like, if I'm the only Latina in a class and the professor looks at me and says, Sofia, as a Latina, what do you think of this? Raw stuff. You've put the weight of so much on my limited, experience from my own small perspective. And I'm pretty sure you wouldn't do that for anyone else, So think about that. If you would ask the same question open-ended to anyone, then yeah. So back to the effective communication. You need ways that students can communicate about this. When there are bias incidents that happen on campus, you need a system for because students will accuse administration of sweeping something under the rug if they feel like something happened on campus and it wasn't communicated widely. But as communication folks, sometimes there are things that happen to students they don't want anyone else to know. So you have to be able to balance that idea of, keeping the campus safe and informing everyone of what's happening if there's a pattern or a serious situation, but honoring the privacy of students when things happen. So but there still has to be some kind of response system in place. Recommendation 7 is offer a range of supportive services in varied formats. So one campus that I recently visited had the Posse Foundation program. Have you ever heard of the Posse Foundation? So campuses sign up. Somebody created this not-for-profit and wanted to have institutions buy into the idea that if you do want to diversify your campus, the idea of Posse was, if I'm going to go to college and I'm going away so far, I'd like to have my posse with me. So students that I feel like I can connect, who understand me, who I can feel comfortable with. So you don't just bring 1 or 2 students, you bring a group. And you make sure that you have the resources to provide not just scholarship, financial support, but also emotional support, adjustment support, academic support, so that students can feel like they can transition at that institution and feel like they belong. So that's one kind of service. There are other things I mentioned earlier, the Office of Multicultural Affairs. There are peer programs. So there's many ways that students can feel connected and feel like their unique perspectives are honored and that they are acknowledged. Yes, we understand that your experience here at this campus might be different, but little by little we can change that. If we create that comfort for you, you'll do it for someone else, and eventually it won't feel this way for others that are like you. Advertise and promote existing programs through multiple channels. So there are campuses doing some amazing things and just not communicating it to anyone. So anybody a Grinch fan? How the Grinch Stole Christmas? In a scene he says, solve world hunger? Tell no one. And that's one of my favorite scenes. But there are so many really cool things happening. And students are like, I didn't know that was happening. I had no idea. And with the way technology is right now, there are many different ways to get the word out. even though we know word of mouth is probably still the number one, friends will go to where their friends are going, especially if it's endorsed by someone that you know. So there are many different ways to get the word out about what's happening on campus. And then participating in resource and information sharing. This one, many campuses, again, have really great best practices happening for them, but may not be sharing it with other campuses. There are ideas you can get. I believe truly in the case system. Have you ever heard of the case system? Copy and steal everything from other campuses. So you case them. There are programs that people put together that they already, for example, we wanted to create a peer alliance program with many different identities. And students themselves gave themselves the names of each kind of peer. We ended up having a PRISM peer mentor, diversity peer mentor, an ability peer mentor. I forgot what name they ended up giving it, but the shortcut was that. But it was different kinds of identities. And we learned that from other institutions who said, here's how we've recruited students to be peers to each other. And here is the training program we used. We tweaked it to make it, because sometimes a best practice in one place is not the best practice on your campus. So there were things on the training that I said, oh, this wouldn't work here, or they don't need that. So there might be, shortcuts, application process that they can just give you the timeline. And you're like, oh, great. I can make it and tailor it for mine. So that kind of resource sharing not only gives other people ideas about what you're doing, but it also gives you ideas on what you can do better or different. And it's not that different than what scholars do anyway. Go to conferences and share their research and share their findings, right? And you get ideas on, that's an interesting, I'm going to follow up on this finding here, or duplicate that, replicate that study, because I want to see how it works with this population or that population, or in this location or that. So very similar, except with programming and with student services and offerings. And then this is the final recommendation. Identify and utilize culturally relevant, efficacious programs and practices. So there are many ways that you can do transitioning in, orientation, that you can add a flair to it that adds the idea of being civil to each other, being culturally, I call it cultural humility. But that idea that you can always look at your program and make sure you ask the question, does this serve everyone's needs? Is there anything about this that someone will not be able to access? What are the barriers that there might be for some people? So one thing we found is there was a yearly tradition for an RA training. At the end, we would have a fun thing, and we realized one year we had an RA that was in a wheelchair. They had never had an RA in a wheelchair before. And guess what? To get to that location for that fun thing that was a tradition, there were steps. The only way to get there was steps. So they had to rethink all of training because there were so many things that they had not even thought about, the Res Life staff. And it wasn't bad intention. It was not, because it was just they hadn't thought about it. So once you had a student who said, I want to be an RA and I want to fully participate and I want to be able to be just like everyone else. So that took some tweaking and looking at some things, but it can be done and it should be done. I truly believe in universal design when possible. It's not always, depending on how your campus is already set up, but at some point we have to look at all of our programs and make sure, does everyone read this the same? Can everyone read this? Can everyone hear this? So there's a lot of, and we usually think of that when it comes to disabilities or differently abled, but you can also say the same for gender. You can also say the same for LGBTQ+. You can also say the same for any other identity. Is everyone hearing the messages and reading everything the same? So I'd love to hear more from you about the 10 before I talk about a pilot. We did have 18 schools started. One couldn't complete because their IRB would not let them. So it's kind of a challenge there. But we have 17 cohort schools that joined us for a pilot. What we're doing is we had them do the diversity and inclusion module in the Healthy Mind study. Some of them did the whole thing, all the other modules too. We also did focus groups. Tomorrow I have a focus group at San Jose City College. That's why I'm here. But we did focus groups with all the other schools, all 16 of the others, and asked faculty and staff in one setting and students in another setting questions about their life on campus and different ways that they're thinking about this topic of mental health resources and well-being of students, all students, but also specifically students of color. So we had them join us. We're providing them resources. We're providing them recommendations based on the information that they shared with us. So we asked them very specific questions about the services they have to offer. Based on all those 10 recommendations, we asked questions. Do you have a way to report bias? Do you have staff that are dedicated to support students of color? Do you have a way to advertise programs that is creative and different? Do you think about ways to bring students together to talk about current events and other things that are happening? So we're looking at some really interesting info. And one of the focus groups I actually did with a school in the Midwest. And I thought, oh, we usually had about 8 to 12 students. And I only had 2. So I said, this should be short. The hour and a half we allocated should be enough time. Not only did the 2 students use the whole hour and a half to just tell me how disappointed they were in their institution. While they loved the place, they also felt we were let down because we feel like we have the weight of everything. These are 2 student leaders, very engaged, thriving from the outside perspective. People are thinking, we sent you our best, are super engaged, excited students who love this place and are having amazing experience, but we want them to be honest with you and tell you what's going on, for them really. And not only did I spend the hour and a half with them, just hearing them out and hearing what they would hope to see. And again, they love the place. So they're giving suggestions on how to make life better for them. As 2 women of color, 1 happened to be Muslim. At the end, I stopped the recording and I said, do you have a few minutes? Just to give them another half hour or so of just like, you matter. What you're doing on your campus is so important. You are going to be amazing people in life. I mean, it was just like, I felt like with such negativity happening for an hour and a half, we needed to leave on a positive note. And this stuff is time consuming, but with all that information, and that's just one campus. That's just one example of one place that gave us this information. So we have transcripts that we're looking through. And that's where we would love to partner with you and think about ways that we can look at that information and think through what else could we do with that information, that rich data. So we did all that data collection like I talked about before. We did the focus groups, and these are the things that we were asking for the administrator and faculty. And it was mostly administrative. We did get faculty on some of the campuses, which was really great to hear their perspectives. And what we found with faculty and staff is we want to be helpful. We just want to know how. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to mess it up. I don't want to step in it. I just want to make sure that students know that I can be a support, but I don't know how to signal that to students. So we're thinking that through. What kind of tools and what kind of how-tos really can people be that support, that visible, true support. And then student discussion groups, I shared one example of what those students had said. And then the self-study, again, asked them all the information about persistence, about the programs they have available, bias reporting protocols, what other protocols do they have in place to support students of color. The Healthy Minds study, again, were a list of questions working with Sue Rankin, who does climate studies on many campuses. They added a list of questions about campus climate in general and specific to their experiences. So what we're doing now, this is through 2020. We are either going to the campus to visit them to give them their results, because what I found, we were just going to send them their report, but some of it is so, if I just got a report telling me students of color are really feeling unaffirmed on your campus, I mean, I just think we have to talk that through first and then give the report. So we reversed how we were going to do it. We were going to do the report, and I just can't imagine people reading that and going, what do I do with all this? So it was good because last week I had one of these meetings, a feedback meeting with a school, and we spent the time really explaining some of the concepts. How is it possible that you have students of color thriving when it comes to our measure of thriving in the Healthy Mind study? Really high. But then when it came to the actual experiencing belongingness on campus, really low. How do you thrive and don't belong at the same time? So there were concepts that we were just trying to figure out and talk through, and we came to the conclusion on that specific campus. Well, the students of color have found each other, and they created a group me, and they've got each other's back, so they feel connected to each other. But they spend time on that group me complaining about all the issues they go through, and all the microaggressions they experience, and all the ways they don't feel like they belong. So wouldn't that make sense? when you get that specific to that campus. So that's why we're giving them the reports after the meeting so that we kind of put it all together and say, okay, looks like from what you told us and the information we talked about, here are some things that you might be able to do under each of these recommendations to help you create that better campus and that more affirming and welcoming campus. So that's the evaluation part that will be next year, asking them again, where are you on the recommendations, and asking them to do 3 to 5 goals between now and next year, next fall. And then we'll check in on them, and then a final report in 2020. And what we're hoping is that we can take some of our learnings here and take the Jed comprehensive approach that I showed you before and figure out under each of those domains, do we need to address each domain separately? Or do we just create a diversity and inclusion one that talks about the idea of equity with mental health and also include other marginalized identities and not just students of color? So that's what I'm grappling with right now. And I'd love to, I put questions here, but I'd love to get your ideas too. So pick your brains too. So any questions or thoughts regarding anything that I said?
I have one.
Yes.
So I'm in our counseling department. Everything is a cohort model. And so I'm trying to work at the level of measuring the cohort climate. Because, so rather than the university, they spend probably more time together. I'm curious about, I haven't been able to find a lot of really good measures. So forget the university, let's work on cohorts. About 1 out of every 10 has issues. A lot of times there's cultural microaggression taking place. What have you found about, first of all, I'm curious, does the size of campus matter? Is it in terms of issues? Is it how it's structured as a cohort? I mean, to some extent, the cohort works really great when it works. When it doesn't work, now you have a bunch of people who are at each other's throats, because there's 20 people who are like, and they can't get away because they're now tied together for 2 years. So I'm curious, what's your experiences in terms of size and cohorts and all of that issues?
Well, one thought I have is if you have a cohort, I'm a fan of it being academically based, because I think students will, when they have nothing in common socially, that's when then there's nothing in common. But if you are taking similar classes and the content is similar, you have something to talk about. So identity is not a thing. It's like the content is the thing. So let's get through that. And we'll figure out as we go along that some of us are going to step in it and say the wrong thing and offend each other. But one thought I have also is making sure that during the orientation process, you allow for that and create expectations and shared standards with each other that says, some of you, we're going to bring you all together, and each of you are from different places, different backgrounds. Find ways to address each other when you are offended or you have an issue. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's we're kind of headed that way, like turning things around. Like, for example, we've been offering the group class like after a year. So wait, maybe we should be thinking about what classes like multicultural
do that
group,
early,
right at the very first.
Yes,
right at the beginning. Question, reality check question. Sometimes academics, we like to look at the world through our academic lens because we know so much. The question is, how do academics with culture and those kind of background and training, diversity, how did those departments do in contrast to others? We would expect that maybe the engineers in Silicon Valley who are kind of like not paying attention, but really, are we really any better sometimes as academics in terms of catching things, or are we just as bad at missing things?
We're better at missing things, I think. But I'm going to answer your other question you had put in your first question about size of the institution. The place that we were, where students are feeling not connected at all and are just, and that's not just students of color. They also are having an issue with alcohol and that being part of the culture. They're like, you can't be an alcoholic while you're on campus because it's not everyone drinks to excess, and that's normal. That's seen as normal. What's not normal is anyone talking about recovery, because that's not a thing on that particular campus. So some students said, I didn't realize that was part of the culture. I wanted to go home right away because I didn't know. But other students, it's so embedded in their culture. So that school only has about 1,600 students. It's tiny. But there's another campus that is very, very diverse. There's no majority of anybody. And it has 25,000 students. And it has the strongest measures we've seen of how connected students feel. I mean, I'm biased also because I happen to know the VP of Student Affairs there, who was my Dean of Students when I was in college back in the early 90s. And she was the first woman of color dean of students that I ever saw. And I remembered that and said, oh, I guess someday I could be dean of students. So maybe that seed got planted back then. But the school she's the vice president of now, it's just a very open environment. There are some things that students do right in the beginning. I think it has to be academic focused in how you teach everyone how to do the being open-minded, being nice. I know that sounds so basic, but some schools have figured out how to put it in the curriculum early on to think about intercultural communication, and it's a class you take, not just, when you have time, come to this training or come to this thing that I'm going to force you to go to because you stepped in or because you had an issue, because then it becomes punitive. Like, now we have a problem. It's better to just be proactive and offer a class right in the beginning, even if it's a 1 credit, 1 month course where you set the standard for your cohort and use academic setting, and there are academic basis for intercultural communication. You don't make this stuff up. There are theories out there on how to do this. So you can actually teach it in a course, but not later. I think in the beginning is the best setting. Anticipate that there are going to be issues with communication, because there always are. Microaggressions will happen. They always will.
Can you describe some effective mechanisms for bias reporting? Like, is it a web form? Is it an anonymous phone line? Like, what have you seen that works?
People being human and validating. I know that's not, mechanism is just one thing. How do you share the info? It's what does an institution do with the info once they get it? Do they respond? I've seen some places, I'm trying to think of where, it might be University of Massachusetts Amherst, that has a form that is really cool. You put in your info and you get back a message that says, that almost validates you right away. You are so brave to tell us what happened. It's really great that you're telling us this. Someone will be following up with you to learn more about this situation. So again, even if someone, if you're anonymous, because they also allow anonymous reporting. That makes me nervous, because then anyone could just put anything in a form and then that's it, right? Some places have done a happy medium where you have to log into the portal so you can find out who it is. But you don't have to enter the information like, here's my name. And that, I know that's just like it's a little bit of trickery, because in a way, when you're not putting your name in there, you think it's anonymous. You'd be surprised how many students I've had conversations with about their Instagram or Twitter communications. And they're like, you're looking at my Twitter account? I'm like, it's open. Yes, I am. But there's that illusion of anonymity, or that no one can find out what this is. So I think the best thing is for students to be able to feel comfortable enough that their campus cares enough about them that they can just submit something with their name on it and share it, and know that there will be follow-up, which takes work. But I think if you already set a campus environment that people feel comfortable to do that, and that people know they're going to be called out, you'll have less of those anyway. So at first, whenever I suggest that to some campuses, they look at me like, who has time to go through every single microaggression? They'd be tired. But I said, okay, but if you tell people as they're coming in, we take this very seriously. We want everyone to feel safe in whatever safe means for you, because safe is different for everybody. Physical safety, mental safety, emotional safety. But if you set that tone on your campus, I think that's, you'll get less, because people will be mindful of their behavior and thinking about how they interact with others and want to learn, how do I not step in it so I don't get this report on me someday, right? So there's, I wish I could pull it up, but look up University of Massachusetts Amherst and you'll see their bias point. So far, that's the only one that I've heard of that does that. But I think others might, I just happen to not know about it. And I know Fordham has, you have to log into the portal. So you can click on their website and find the reporting form and find a basic one, but then you have to log in. So, yeah. And then there's campuses who have nothing. I won't name those, but no process. Again, students will go to public safety or security, and security will say, I don't know what you're talking about, or they just don't know what to do with that information because it doesn't rise to the level of a hate crime or so severe that it's hurting someone physically, and they don't see it as an issue of safety, which I think is wrong. So I have strong feelings about that. You can see. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about one of the things that we're encountering is for some of our marginalized students and student groups, like them wanting to hold space for themselves and
Yes.
their population, but also, which I think is important and necessary, but also we're a small campus that, you know, like if we have a Black student union and then a Black student union, then, you know, it's starting to kind of divide itself even further. And I'm not sure what to do with that. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I'll ask you a question back. Is there limitation with space or resources that is causing subdivision to be an issue?
So to clarify, head of student services, I do clubs and orgs. There's not necessarily a lack of space or resources. We are a small institution, geographically divided, and it's only been just a year since my position was created. There's a comprehensive guidance for clubs and orgs. So I am constantly beating the drum of it has to be open to all students and has to build community, while respecting and looking for a way to justify my expectation that almost all groups are open to all students, but to hold space for those groups that want to hold community, and I think there's very good reason to, for just members or people who identify with that community or that identity.
Right. And even knowing that a club exists, even if someone doesn't join, when I walked in, I saw the sign for the salsa class, and I was like, ooh, I could be here. I am welcome here. I love salsa. You know, like there's symbols of, like students want a calendar of events. They don't show up. They just want to know that their stuff's happening because it makes them feel like it's an engaged campus. That's a weird phenomenon. But the idea of subgroups, I think having the conversations about why do you think you need the subgroup. So I'll give you some examples of the conversations I had during my time. We had a Black student union, but then we had an African student union that wanted to form, and they were students that were recently arrived from Africa. So different, because their issues were being confused with African Americans or being called that didn't jive with them because they felt like, I'm not that. Then it's like, well, what's wrong with that? And let's figure that out. And then it becomes a whole nother conversation. But there are some campuses that will have a Latino student union or Hispanic student union, and then it'll have a Dominican student union, a Cuban student union. University of Miami has several different. Did you go there? You went? So, you know, so they have. So some administrators who are in charge of the clubs are going, but what is the deal here? Why are there so many different groups wanting to find community? But there are some things that happen within a larger community where some students don't feel welcome. So then you got to address it on the why are students not feeling welcome? What kind of training do you have for all your student leaders to create spaces that anyone can come to in the true sense, while honoring the idea that there are moments when you do need people who understand, and it's a shortcut and it's less exhausting. I went to a social justice training institute, just for an example, and they do twice a year. They do this training. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're awesome.
Is it worth it? It's on my
Yes, I went back. I'm talking about it, and I went back 2 years later as an intern to observe the process and be part of it. That was in 2004, and then I went back in 2006. And they put everybody. Their idea is to get people to apply, and they actually try to get many different identities. But then they have caucuses that they form, and they say, okay, we want a caucus of all white people, all Latinos, all people of color. Because then first they do people of color, and then they separate out Asian American. They do, you know, and depending on who's there. So I remembered when they said, you know, as people of color, we're always the ones that have to change and do something. So we're going to ask, and I was blown away by this. I was like, can they do that? They said, okay, white people, all of you get up, you go. Because what people of color work double all the time. So you make the effort to leave the room. And I'm listening, I'm like, there has to, you know, they say, trust the process. Because there was something about that didn't feel right to me, but I kind of understood by the end of the 5 days. When they walked out, it was palpable in the room. Everyone just did a, and it's like that idea of someone who you don't have to explain yourself to, that you don't have to posture. And even within groups, it's very similar. Some people might say, well, what's the difference between Puerto Rican and Dominican? And I remembered, Puerto Ricans thought they were better than us because Dominicans were the immigrants. It was the language, the way that they would make fun of you, that kind of thing. That some people may never understand unless you were in it. So from the outside, it's hard to understand that, but I think having the conversations with students and having a way when you're forming a new club, having them self-reflect on why. What spaces don't exist for you now that you're trying to create? Because maybe there's something bigger there. Maybe it's not just about a club. Sometimes it's not what people think it is. It's something different that's happening. And when I'm always giving my own examples, my lived experience. But undergrad, I went to the first meeting for Latinas Unidas. I'm Latina. I want to be unida. So I went to the meeting, and I felt completely out of my element because I speak Spanish. I grew up speaking Spanish, but they were speaking Spanish all the time. And I was kind of the Americanized Latina who was like, I'm from the Bronx. It just wasn't the experience that I thought. So then I went over to another group. It was like the newspaper group that did the Spanish language. Again, I felt out of place. So finally, I found my way over to the Latino Student Union, LASU. I became president eventually, but that's where I found the Americanized, quote unquote. And I'm saying this, just from my perspective from back then. I found the Latinos who were kids like me, grew up in the Bronx, grew up in Manhattan, grew up urban, listening to hip hop. They were more like me, and they were Afro-Latino like me. The Latinas Unidas were all white, long hair, and I was different. I didn't look like them, and I had black hair. And I learned that I was black in college too, by the way. So anyway, there's a lot of things you learn as you're making a journey, whether it's undergrad, grad, PhD program. There's a lot of identity crises you're having within. Even if you went undergrad, graduated, and you're going to grad school, it's a whole nother group of insecurities, imposter syndrome, and other things that come up that people might not understand. It's like, well, you're here. You made it here. But they don't realize there are things that come up along the way that make someone feel less than. So I don't know if that answered your question. That's a lot more info than you were looking for. but just listening to what students are saying, I think it's important to have a mechanism in place to just ask why. What do you need from each other or from me as your support? Any comments or thoughts about do you want me to put the recommendations back up? Would that be helpful?
Some of the diverse faculty, it's always an interesting one because everybody wants to hire diverse faculty, but I keep questioning is, well, who's producing diverse faculty? Because everybody's like waiting for the diverse student to come out of the drip out of the faucet, and they'll run there and go like, wait a second, we need to back up about 8 years. The question is, are there any initiatives? I mean, is it high school when you work with people, or at least in community college? Because I'm not sure when I wanted to become a faculty member, but it's kind of late to recruit them, I think, in their doctoral dissertation phase. We need more people getting into them. What are we doing about getting more people into graduate and doctoral and faculty roles? Getting them trained, that's what I think would be. Let's do something different. Maybe I should go to community colleges and start recruiting students to go to.
You could. I mean, there's a lot of research about who faculty choose to co-write and do research with. And usually you pick someone who has similar interests to you as you're building that pipeline or pathway to the faculty life. I have a Facebook group that has about 4,800 I call it Latinas completing doctoral degrees, because I said, maybe 2 or 3 of us will get together on this Facebook page and give each other tips on how to finish this darn dissertation. It's a process. And now I have 4,000 something who are always engaged. And that question of where are you willing to go work? They're out there. There are current Ph.D. having professionals who have chosen to do administrative work or, administrative positions because they couldn't get a faculty position, because there were some things that came up about what you need to write, what is considered scholarly writing, where do you publish, who are your faculty at your previous, there's a lot of legacy stuff, I'm going to call it, where you're always looking for the things that you had along the way, and you have to rethink that and think about what value do they bring, what do they contribute, and can you rethink how and where people have published. Like, think about that, because I know that starts getting into tenure processes and what do you need to get tenure. There's a lot. I can talk about this one all day long, but there are also other considerations when it comes to recruiting. Even if you do find those really amazing people out there who have all the credentials you need. There's a place that I visited not so long ago that if you recruited me to live there, I would not. There's no one there that looks like me. Not that I have to have people that look like me, but I have to feel like I can find community. And when it comes to a social life, family life, and other considerations, if there's not even a beauty parlor that knows how to do my hair, I don't know. I can't move there. So you got to think about those considerations too.
When you think of the posse model of bringing in a group of faculty,
I would love for there to be a posse model. That is a perfect example of how you would create. I mean, you have to do it in a certain way because, with undergrad students, you can kind of assume that the students are ready to go anywhere and adventurous. But when you're talking about adults later, that gets different. But I can see there's, what's her name? There's a faculty diversity page. Rockefeller is the last name. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but her goal is to try to diversify the faculty, and she has a whole webpage of, I'll send it to you. If you email me, I'll get that to you. But it's things to think about when you are recruiting diverse faculty that you can mention during interviews that will help someone understand that you understand. Even you being aware, I know that, what are some things you're thinking about regarding your move to here? Because if you share that you're thinking about it, that's the kind of place I want to work for. I want to work for you as a faculty member and work with you. If you can express to me that you understand how hard it would be for a girl from the Bronx to live in Montana. If you could just tell me, I'll go to Montana. It's fine. I went to Nashville and I was like, oh, I love this place. I might move here. Just because of how nice everyone was and how affirming, and it was just a really cool place to be. If you have people around you that make you feel like that, you can move anywhere. You can move anywhere, especially if it's students that can benefit from your knowledge and your wisdom and whatever you're studying. So there isn't a problem with faculty diversity recruiting. There's a problem with knowing how and thinking about it, thinking it through a little bit more. But they're out there. There's people. It's just difficult to get through that process. So I think we're over our time. But I'm happy to stay and chat a little longer. There's some groups later that we're just talking through, so we'll do the same. As you can see, I mince no words. I just say what I mean what I say. I share whatever I can, but this is me paying attention and really being, I guess, nosy at every institution I've been at. I've made my way over to whatever diversity group, committee, strategic planning group, task force, they've named it everything. I was there. Whether I begged my way in, whatever, I figured it out. And just listening to what all the challenges are over the years made me want to come to this and think about, I think we've got something here. And these are some of the framework beyond just mental health and wellness and emotional well-being. I think this framework actually can offer things to consider if you haven't even thought about it. So what I'm hoping to do is write more about this, whether it's op-eds or more, some of my titles might be rude at first, but it's like, get over yourselves, really. Like, there's a lot of very straight talk that needs to happen around this topic. And I think I might be, now that I don't work for one institution, because as dean of students, I had to be dean for everybody. So I had to be very open and very careful with my language. But I think because we're saying this is a priority, I feel like I can pull together scholars on this topic to say, we're going to validate what you have already found in your research. This is not made up. This is out there, and this is real, and we just need to name it. And that's it. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
I'll see you at 4. I'll need your 4 o'clock group.
Oh, thank you. And